All right, Pickle. Headline. Did you see this? Did you hear about this?
I did.
College football playoff to remain at 4 teams until the 12-year contract expires after the 2025 season. I'm reading this from Heather Dinich over at ESPN. After months of lengthy debates and multiple meetings about expansion, the college football playoff will remain at 4 teams through the end of its current 12-year contract, which expires following the 2025 season, CFP Executive Director Bill Hancock announced Friday. By choosing to remain at 4 teams for 4 more years, the 10 FBS conferences and Notre Dame have forfeited roughly $450 million in potential revenue. There's a quote there, blah, 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 on and on and on. So there was, for the past 2 years, there's been talk about expansion to the college football playoff. We're at 4 teams right now. There was talk about an 8-team playoff. Eventually, what ended up coming out was the 12-team playoff was going to be the real, was going to take hold, and that was going to be the one that everybody was really hot after, was the 12-team playoff. But in the end, down the stretch, some conferences got some cold feet about this. Most notably, the ACC came out in opposition to the 12-team playoff, at least for now. And so it's dead for now. They're going to keep it for the next 4 seasons. So that is certainly noteworthy. That is obviously something to keep an eye on, that they are going to remain at 4 teams through 2025. The earliest that they would expand at the playoffs would be 2026 season. And I am here to tell you, valued viewer and valued listener, that you don't have to care about the college football playoff. You don't have to care about who wins the national championship. Like, are you familiar with the concept of a permission structure, Pickle? The idea that you need somebody to tell you what you think or what you're doing is okay, right?
Validation is a simple term for that.
It's just something. It's somebody gives you the permission structure. Somebody gives you permission to do what you're doing. Like, even though you know you don't, you're a free person, but you just need that permission. If you need that, here I am. There's plenty of other people out there who'll do it, but I will be the one to tell you. You don't need to care about the college football playoff. You don't need to care about who wins the national championship. So I think we got to start with this. It's okay to admit that there is no good way to crown a college football national champion. The FBS ranks we're talking about. Now, I tweeted about this, and people were saying, the BCS was fine. The BCS was better. Maybe. But do you remember how much grousing there was about the BCS?
Oh, yeah, because they just got to decide who got to play in the national championship.
Remember how much complaining there was about that? There's also people saying, 12-team playoff would certainly be better. Maybe.
The point is, either way you do it, there's still an overarching committee telling you who gets to try for it.
There will be inevitable complaining about the 12-team playoff when we get there. And
Absolutely.
I think we will. I think 2026 we'll get there. Okay? We have to draw a distinction between better and good. Being better does not mean than the current situation does not mean it's a good situation. Being better than that is like that's improving. Like, we're talking about the prettiest turd here. You know what I mean? And I've done a lot of thinking about this. The problem is that we are trying to take one sport we love, and we are trying to do with it what we do to other sports that we love. We are trying to take college football and fit it into the sports box in America. That's what we're trying to do. Think about this, okay? Think about the NFL. Think about the NBA. Think about Major League Baseball. Think about the NHL. The 4 major pro sports in America. They're all structured the same way. Now, there are variations, but they're all structured the exact same way. They're divided into conferences and divisions. The regular season earns you a spot in the tournament. If you win the tournament, you win the championship. That's how it's put together. Okay? We're trying to do that with college football, and yet college football is so fundamentally different than those leagues, than those professional leagues. First of all, there's just way too many teams. There's 130 teams in FBS college football. There's only 32 teams in the largest of those of the 4 major sports. 130 versus 32. That's part of it. The other part of it is, and this is the big talking point, there is too little parity in college football. There's functionally none. There's no and that's part of what makes it interesting, but there's almost no parity. There are a handful of haves, and there are a whole lot of have-nots. So quality of team, quality of play, strength of schedule is not evenly distributed, and it's not ever going to be close. There's no parity in college football, but we're trying to treat it as if it is like one of the 4 major sports. I'll give you an example, and this is not airtight, but I found this interesting, okay? To draw a parallel between the haves and the have-nots. Let's take a look at the average coach salary, okay? The average coach salary for the 130 FBS teams. In 2021, the average coach salary, do you have a guess?
No, I do not.
$3.2 million. The average coach salary in college football was $3.2 million for the 130 FBS teams. 13 coaches made twice that, at least twice that. So 10% of the teams coaches made twice that. Okay? 32 coaches made a third of that. Okay? Nearly a quarter of the teams paid their coach a third or less than the average salary in college football. And that's not everything. I want to be clear, but I think it's an important data point. When you compare it to something like, let's say, Major League Baseball payroll, right? Because you can pay your college football coach whatever you want. You can pay him $100 million if you want. If you want to pay football Jesus $100 million to be your head coach, you could. Major League Baseball also does not have a salary cap. They have a luxury tax, but functionally they do not have a salary cap. The average Major League Baseball payroll in 2021 was $104 million. That's the average. Nobody spent twice that. 0. And only 2 teams spent a third of that. 6% of them. It was the Cleveland Indians and the Pittsburgh Pirates. They spent a third or less than the average. So you can immediately see, and money's not everything. Well, in college football, it kind of is.
Mm-hmm. I was like, that's not an accurate statement anymore.
But you can see that there is, in that measure, more parity between those franchises and the college football programs. And yet, we try to cram them into the same box. But all of that, really, all of that's kind of beside the point. Because who wins the national championship is not what makes college football fun, in my opinion. It's not. What makes college football fun is that there's 130 teams. Mm-hmm. It's that there's 130 stories. It's that there's 130 angles. There's 130 different measurements of success. 130 unique snowflakes that we get to observe, right? It's kind of another part of the reason why we like Texas high school football here is that there's 1,200 stories. There's 1,200 teams, and every team has a story, right? But we have been conditioned as fans, partially because we watch the other sports. I think in large part because we watch the other sports. Mm-hmm. We have been conditioned to believe that if you're not first, you're last.
Yeah, that's what makes sports sports. I'll go against you on that point. I think that there is a certain validation to that. If you are competitive in nature, then that's how you see things. And I don't necessarily think there's a huge thing wrong with that. I see where you're going with it, but I wouldn't say that that's like a fundamental downfall of sports.
I'm not saying it's a fundamental downfall of sports.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm saying is paying so much attention to to who wins the national championship that you ignore the other 126 teams
mm-hmm.
is, in my opinion, not a satisfactory way to enjoy the sport.
Yeah.
So there's so much coverage of college football, and especially from mainstream outlets, there's so much CFP-centric coverage, right? It's all about it's way too much of college football playoff centered focus. Who's going to make the playoffs? That they ignore the other storylines going on. There's a reason, for example, that I think that ESPN paid not only for the college football playoff games, but they paid for the reveal show. I've gone on and on about this. The reveal show is actually the most important show they do, because that is the actual culmination of their college football coverage. Everything about their coverage is about the college football playoff. Now, I'm not trying to pick on ESPN. I think they're more of an avatar for money in college football and what's driving it. But that's particularly interesting to me, is that that's a tell. When they are making that big deal about the college football playoff reveal, that's the tell that all of their coverage is centered around that. You know, friend of the show, Bill Connelly at ESPN, he is fond of saying that college football is best enjoyed from snout to trotter, right? From rooter to tutor. You got to enjoy the whole hog, right? Because what were the most compelling, let's get local here for a second. What were the most compelling stories in college football in 2021 in Texas? I would say UTSA was one of them, right? Mm-hmm. UTSA was certainly one of the most compelling stories in Texas in 2021. UTEP, a compelling story. Those teams were never, ever going to win the national championship. Ever. So it was certainly not, I'll tell you what, the most compelling story in the state of Texas was certainly not the chase for the national championship. It just wasn't. Now, look, enjoy what you want. Enjoy college football however you want, but I have found that a national championship-centered consumption of college football is pretty unfulfilling and pretty unsatisfying. And so if you need to hear it from somewhere, I'm happy to tell you, you don't have to care about the national championship. You don't have to care about the playoff. That doesn't make you a bad college football fan. You can just enjoy what you enjoy. You can enjoy it from rooter to tutor. That was my first thought whenever the...
Yeah, just your first thought. I think, just to play devil's advocate, I think that the college football playoffs is getting the exact reaction, like, out of you that they want out of people. Of saying it's okay not to care, but clearly it gets people fired up. It gets the brand out there. It gets people talking about it. Like, I think that you are a prime example of exactly what, like, I'm not saying it's good, and I'm not saying that's how the sport should be played, but looking at it from, they're a money-grabbing business, and that's what they want is viewership, and getting people as riled up about this, and inevitably thousands of people still watch, I think that's all they care about.
I don't agree.
That's fine.
Because here's the issue for them.
Mm-hmm.
Is that I'm basically done talking about the college football playoff.
We'll see.
And I'm done thinking about it. And I'm done spending the mental capital and the mental energy on it. Because I don't think that it is all that important to the college football landscape. It is a part, but we have been told that it is the driving factor, and I just don't agree with that. Yeah. I just don't agree with that. Because of all of the reasons that we've seen over the past few years, there's going to be a lot of hemming and hawing and, wringing of hands about how the college football playoff is ruined because they're not expanding or they need to go back to the BCS or whatever. And the fact of the matter is that there's not a great way to crown a national champion, and we probably spend too much time thinking about it. There you go.
Thanks so much for watching that video. If you would like more and to be notified when they come out, go ahead and click that subscribe button right down there. You can also watch Texas Football Today every day live at noon on TexasFootball.com, Facebook, Twitch, and right here on YouTube. For more of the best coverage of Texas football in the Lone Star State, go to TexasFootball.com/subscribe.